You can start the recording. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call to order the Whatcom County Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee meeting for Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. It's 11 a.m. and we are meeting virtually. We will start with our land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, thanks everybody for being here. Jill, have you heard from Stephen? Oh, there he is. There he is. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Barry. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. We just did the land acknowledgement, so we're just getting rolling. The first item we have on our agenda today is an update on the Justice Project and our Stakeholder Advisory Committee. If you recall, at our last steering committee meeting and our full task force meeting, we integrated that work into the task force as part of that team. It's already starting to emerge how that's working, or it's kind of started organically, but we have a couple of things to talk about today that our planning team discussed last week that we think might be valuable. So we had our first meeting on the 20th of January. It was informative in nature. We had presentations by Sheriff Elfo, Prosecutor Ritchie, myself, Deputy Executive Schroeder, just kind of on the lay of the land and how we the history of this project since 2019 and further back, obviously, but this particular stakeholder advisory group was formed in 2019 and, of course, went on hiatus during the initial phases of COVID. But the idea we wanted to float today was, as we were putting together our first meeting, one of the topics that came up in our planning sessions was the ability to do subcommittee style work. Because the task force is so large, we wanted to be able to find a way to have that group be able to focus on individual elements of the study for the needs assessment. So the initial thought was we could do breakouts during the SAC meetings, and that proved to be problematic through our legal counsel as far as the interpretation of open public meetings and how that works. So we kind of abandoned that idea. And so I had come up with this thought, and I had this rattling around in my head for a while, of how we could use our IPTRF subcommittee structure to integrate that work alongside the keep wanting to call them the Strategic Air Command, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So one of the things that happened right away was when we started planning meeting 2, which is the kind of the data side of things. Dr. Harris from the University of Washington is kind of spearheading that piece for us to put together the study. It became evident that the index committee was going to be involved, and Caleb got kind of roped in, or however you want to put that. But he got contacted. I believe you've been contacted, right, Caleb, by Dr. Harris in setting up this kind of this analysis team for data. So they're on their way to doing that. So we thought that, Jack and I and Stephen talked last week about the idea of putting this work before our subcommittees and letting the stakeholder advisory group join that portion of the agenda of our subcommittee meetings for the IPTRF. An example of that, beyond just the data side, would be the behavioral health inventory and gap analysis work would be very well placed to go into the behavioral health subcommittee of our task force. The potential problem is we have to figure out how we can involve the stakeholder group without creating other Open Public Meetings Act problems. So that's something that we can figure out offline, I think, with Jill and myself and Kathy Halka and maybe legal. But we just wanted to float that idea and see, since you all are the chairs of those subcommittees, how you feel about taking that work on. It just seems to be more efficient than reforming and reinventing the wheel and all the infrastructure that's involved in creating subcommittees just for a short time for that group, when we could roll it into this ongoing work that we're doing and have it be part of it. So that's kind of the pitch. I just wanted to lay that out today and talk about it and see what everybody thought. Arlene, you're on mute.
I was wondering if the committee chairs are also SAC advisors,
In many cases, yes.
but not all.
I'd have to look at the list. I know Dan is. I know Caleb is.
I am.
You are. So I think probably a majority are.
Okay. Right.
Dan?
How would that process work? So this group, the SAC doesn't meet until April, I forget the date. So would we be, I mean, would it be after that the subcommittees would be, given the work, or would it be before? I'm just trying to think of timeline and like how would we know what work we're supposed to be doing?
So I think the timeline would be probably starting in March. I think February is a little soon to get that on our plate. But the thinking was we would have a spot on each subcommittee agenda. Well, the chairs would decide that, of course. For example, say you have a half hour set aside for SAC discussions in your subcommittee, and you convene that at the beginning of your meeting, and then work through that. And then when you're done with that portion of your agenda, then the SAC members would be dismissed, and then you would continue on your normal subcommittee meeting. That's just kind of one scenario. But we would not wait until after April, because I think we want to get that behavioral health piece started right away, because that's probably going to come back to us in May-ish, I'm guessing, to the SAC once all that study is done. So I think it's incumbent upon us, especially on the way things are going in the jail right now, to really to advance this work. And I think that's probably the best way to do that. Because I think there's things that we can do before that April meeting for sure at the subcommittee level.
Okay.
Arlene? Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, no, sounds good. I'm just curious because, we're on a timeline here. If we're talking next November for a ballot measure, we have a lot of work to do within the SAC. And then if the task force of subcommittees can help in that process, I mean, I'm all for it. I'm not against it at all. I just wanted to understand what the expectations are and how we can be of help, especially on behavioral health. That's a huge piece right now. City of Bellingham is down. We're down 34 officers right now, and there's been a lot of. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's been incidents where response has been lowered, I guess, and so we just have a lot on our plate, and I want to make sure that a jail facility is going to be successful in the ballot measure. And so the more time we can put into it, the better. And that's where I'm coming from.
I agree with you, Dan. And I let me just respond, Arlene, quickly. Yeah. And I think this work continues through 2022 as far as the needs analysis portion of it. So I think we have all of this year and potentially some of next to work on this. So I agree with you. It takes time to get this right, and we don't want to get it wrong. Okay. Arlene?
Yeah, I mean, in a certain way, it makes really good sense to do this because on our committees, we've just spent several years listening to reports of providers and administrators who are giving these services that we're thinking about. So we've been learning a lot about what is available, but also what is not sufficient. the gaps. So we've been definitely hearing that too. So the committees are pretty well informed.
Yeah, and that was the thinking, that a lot of this work has already been started, and the familiarity with the work is high within the task force.
Yeah.
So lending that expertise and experience of us been doing this now for like 5+ years would be beneficial. Stephen?
Yeah, the part of it that made sense to me was taking advantage of the work that's been done. And I don't think that needs to wait for a particular meeting. For instance, I think both Legal and Justice Systems Committee and the Behavioral Health Committee have charted resources, inadequate resources, and needed resources in the sequential intercept model. And I think familiarizing SAC members with that charting work and what that means would be useful. And frankly, if you all were willing, I think it would be helpful even outside a committee meeting for the SAC members in that area to meet with the co-chairs and just to walk through some of that stuff so that it's sort of a brain dump from prior work of the committees. To me, that seems like the greater value than participating in any particular discussion in a committee meeting.
I think a little of both. I think what you're saying is important, especially initially, to get that kind of orientation, right?
Right. The other thing I'll say is there's a reason why there are joint meetings between those two committees. And your example of how many police officers were down, Dan, is a good one, because that is both a behavioral health gap and a law enforcement, legal and justice systems gap. So, but I think the SAC people are going to be choosing one of those focuses. Tell me if I'm wrong, Barry, based on their interest or their experience. And so somehow we need to convey to them also the overlap we're seeing and have integrated into our committee structure, and what that means for planning out the initiative and what the new jail and auxiliary services are also.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Like Dan, as being one of the committees that I think you're interested in getting some input or combining for part of these efforts, wanting to get a really clear idea of what the ask is. And when I hear Stephen mention maybe outside of the meeting, that's one of the things that I was thinking. So my first point is I might say that the work of the SAC and a behavioral health committee, they're both so important, but I don't know that combining them over the same hour and a half is going to do either of them justice. So this is part of me because I'm co-chair of the behavioral health subcommittee. We have challenges getting through our agendas because we have power-packed agendas and we have people very interested, and I think it's really good work. So I say that with some chagrin because I co-chair it, right? And I'm part of that issue. But the other reason why is because the issues are so good and the conversation's good. And I know many in the steering committee are on those and choose to attend. So wouldn't want to interrupt that. And then I look at what you're proposing, Barry, and I think, well, my gosh, how important is that conversation? So I don't want to volunteer Dan, but I do want to offer that maybe it's important enough work that we could run a separate meeting, a special meeting that maybe is partly facilitated by, if you want the facilitation, Barry, if that's what you were looking for, we could kind of facilitate for maybe certain members of SAC or maybe the whole thing and do that brain dump, but in kind of an organized, concise fashion, maybe with some materials. And I guess I'm thinking that a half an hour inside of a meeting might not do anything substantial. And in order to get the kind of work that you're wanting and that kind of knowledge transfer to happen, I'm wondering, and I don't want to volunteer anybody else, but I want to just offer that maybe having a separate meeting that is maybe co-facilitated or the agenda's created, and then we work on what's a good way to transfer some of the knowledge of the IPRTF to SAC? Is some of that in writing? Is some of that in data? Is some of that in coalescing some of our minutes? Some of that in kind of preparing reports? So, I know that you all had 3 or 4 speakers, I think, at that SAC meeting, kind of doing that same thing. And I'm wondering if we might mimic that a little bit, where we in the IPRTF do it in kind of an organized fashion. So I'll stop there on that particular idea of a special meeting, but it's just kind of like, do we put it in an existing one? And I think that could be challenging. The second piece is getting really clear on what the ask is, because I know you have a backbone. So you have Marty Solomon, you have some consultants providing your organizational meeting backbone, right? So you're not really looking for that. It sounds like you're more looking for the knowledge, the observations, the input of both, not really just the chairs, but the membership of that meeting and over time. And I think if that's the case, and I saw the nod, then I would just offer that a special meeting would be a better way to do that than just being an agenda item for 30 minutes in a meeting.
Yeah, and that was just a scenario to stimulate thinking. So yeah, I'm not wedded to that idea at all, but I just wanted to talk about integrating the work. I think that's the bigger idea, of course. And I agree with you, Mike. And we might have we're going to have that definitely on our full task force meeting agendas. There will be a SAC report section in those meetings that we can address the whole task force. But yeah, I'm open to what I think the chairs of the subcommittees need to help develop that process as well. And
the other thing that I would just add is, in addition to us, and I see Perry here. So Perry, I'm going to bring up a meeting of yours that I recently attended that you're chairing. I think you've been chairing it since Ann left us, which was kind of a combined, right, like behavioral health kind of status report. I don't know if you've attended those or anybody in this call has. They're very rich, meaning there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of expertise there. So I wouldn't mind if we are going to do a special session, and Perry, I'm not volunteering you, but I was impressed by what I saw there. I'm also impressed by the representation you have. You have, Compass at the table and all these various pieces, right, that are currently providing a lot of our crisis support and a lot of our behavioral health services. So, I'm just kind of fantasizing here, but envisioning that maybe coordinating the work of IPRTF behavioral health and maybe Perry's committee, and Perry, I'm getting the name wrong, of that group. Could we somehow chart out a really toothsome, useful special session that would give Barry what you're looking for in terms of that expertise and that brain dump?
That's great thinking, Mike. I like it. Raylene?
Thank you. I agree with Mike and Dan. Actually, I'm echoing almost everybody in making sure that we get this information out to everybody. I think our meetings are jam-packed, but I think the SAC members would be benefited by at least being at some of the meetings, in particular the joint meeting when we're talking about competency and reentry and navigation. These are all things that need to be looked at and implemented into the new facility, and we need to make sure it's communicated properly. I do like the idea of maybe having a separate meeting with the chairs after it's been brought up at each subcommittee, so that we can get adequate response from all of the members, or maybe having them come to a steering committee or a special steering committee with all of us to be able to pass on information.
Dan?
I agree with Mike. I think that there's too much content it can't be a half an hour agenda item in the meeting. I think that I like Raylene's idea about SAC members attending the meetings, in particular the joint meeting. I think it would be a rich education for them. This is all germane to what they're talking about. It fits neatly within that. But as far as getting people on board with the sequential intercept model and other kind of really kind of tactical and technical items, I think that's got to be a separate thing. But I don't think the SAC is meeting frequently enough. I mean, it should be a monthly meeting. I don't know why it's quarterly. And there probably were reasons. I'm not criticizing the decision makers on that, but the body of work to get this to the finish line, which is on the ballot by August, or approved by county council to get on the ballot by August of next year. That's the deadline for November general, is significant. And it's lost twice. The last time it got its doors blown off. And so to recover from that means that we're asking voters who voted against it to vote for it and give them a reason to do it. And the behavioral health piece is what we heard most. And there's a lot of intricacies within the legal system, out the LFOs, everything. There's so many items that legal financial obligations. Sorry, acronym soup there, but there's just so many things that have been kind of bandied about here. And then the raft of laws that came through Olympia last year, the booking restrictions that our officers on the street face. There was an assault 10 feet from me where I sit right now. I'm in a hotel bar right now. It's right in my office, basically. It's closed. There's an assault where a person got punched in the mouth, and the responding officers did not arrest that person because there's no capacity at the jail. So an assault on a stranger doesn't even warrant jail time right now. That's not right, in my opinion. So this is an urgent public safety need that we have to put our foot on the gas here. And whether that means the SAC members coming to the joint meetings or coming to all the meetings, which I wouldn't be opposed to, I think that's got to get looked at. And then I think that the SAC frequency of meetings needs to be sped up. It's just too. This is the biggest expenditure rather that Whatcom County will see in its history in all of our lifetimes. And so I'm making my pitch here to speed up and create a sense of urgency around this. This has got to get fixed.
Well, let me respond to that. First of all, we do have a sense of urgency, and the quarterly thing. We're not really planning to do this quarterly. We're planning to have it more frequent. That the data piece just is taking a little bit more time to organize, and the availability of Dr. Harris and so on. So initial discussions with Holly and everyone thought monthly is going to be difficult to do because of getting material ready and of those large chunks of work. So maybe this is the answer to having more frequent engagement, is having these other meetings at the subcommittees level, whether they be special meetings or join the subcommittees of the IPTRF. Maybe that's a good way to do that, but I don't anticipate going the next meeting after April being June, for instance, or July. I don't see that at all. I agree with you, Dan. We will get more down into the every 2 months, 6 weeks. We have to cut it down, but we also have to make sure that people have time to put together the material to get before the SAC as well. So that's kind of the thinking. Stephen, then Arlene.
I guess I want to add another factor. I want to endorse Barry's sense that the SAC planning team at least feels the same urgency. To me, the question is balancing that not with getting materials together, but if you looked around at the people at that meeting, quite a number of them are on the task force, but many of them are not. And I think we need to respect how much work and how much expertise we've created in the task force over 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the kind of nuanced discussions, the kind of understandings of systems, how they fit, how they don't fit. Half the SAC doesn't have any of that background information. And for this to be an informed recommendation, they've got to grasp that stuff in some usable way. And you can't speed that up. There's a limit to how much you can speed that up. So I think that's the balance that needs to be struck here. And I was willing to try every other month, like Barry's original plan said, because that allowed some ability for uninformed people to process things that are really complicated that not all of us have even processed fully yet. So that's the value of the PACE, or something like the PACE that's been plotted out so far. And I just think we need to understand how much we know and how little a lot of people who care about this issue know alongside us.
Arlene?
Yes, it brings up one more piece of this very large puzzle, which is we made a promise to the public to deeply involve the general public in giving us feedback to these goals that we have. So that means that information that that we'll be sharing with SAC somehow needs to get out to the public too, so that they can be informed even in giving their feedback to us. So we promised this.
Yeah, that's correct, Arlene. And that's where our public engagement plan will come into effect. And that Jill might be able to answer that question along with something else she obviously has on her mind. So she's got her hand up. But as far as our, somewhere we're hoping a March timeline to have that, that ability to have, to get that public engagement plan going. So, Jill?
Thank you. I just wanted to throw out an idea I had about the committees meeting with SAC members as an alternative to scheduling a separate or a special meeting. One option would be to just extend the length of the current meeting that's on the books. It can be a little like herding cats trying to find a common meeting time for everyone. So I would say if we have meeting times already, and another option would just be to start earlier or to end later, and then have that extra time scheduled for the SAC.
And that was one of the attractive parts of this plan, is that all the meeting infrastructure is set up and scheduled, and just as you said, it can be like herding cats to get all that set up for additional meetings. Any other thoughts? Caleb?
So, as many of us are probably acutely aware, there's been some pretty clear focus on the facility here in the recent days and week. And what I want to say to the group is, whatever it takes for me to meet with, talk with, work on, I'm willing to put in the extra effort. If it means extending meeting times so that everybody can be a participant, if it means, working behind the scenes to get data together and make it in presentable format, I just want, if it helps, I'm willing to do whatever it takes.
Thank you, Caleb. Perry?
Some really great ideas and a very significant challenge just in terms of the sophistication and the information that's there. In regard to the behavioral health component, one of the thoughts that I had was I haven't looked at what was completed as far as the sequential intercept model, but I think that it needs to be updated even, and maybe that's already been considered. But it is a really great reference in a couple of different ways, as folks know, in terms of where that intercept occurs, and also the services that are out there, if all of those are inclusive. And so I was just thinking about, I think that folks are absolutely correct that whatever the format of that informing and et cetera is important, but the walk away with some reference material, I think will be hugely important for that level of sophistication and retention that we're also pursuing. So I offer that up. And as Caleb had said, and I really appreciate that it's like everything that I can do as far as, that material and updating that material is, I'm just sort of standing by to say, okay, what do we need that I can lean into and bring some staff into maybe and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you know what, Perry? That's kind of something we promised as far as the intercept model when we threw up just the basic one-liner kind of, right? on that. We promised to bring back that analysis that we've done with our programming under each of those elements under the plan. So that does need to get updated, and we need to have that probably available as soon as possible. Mike?
Back to the talk about the subcommittees and kind of helping inform that. I think there is a lot of wisdom, but I think it needs to be somewhat coalesced, put into a usable form. It's going to need a little bit of organization, I think, to have it be really useful for SAC members. And Stephen, when you said, there's a lot of folks that just don't have that background, that means you can't talk in high jargon language day one, right? So we have to find a way to do this. I'm not talking about dumbing it down. I believe in honoring, respecting people of all levels of knowledge, because I'm ignorant in so many ways. But I think some pre-work would make it most valuable. I really like what Perry's talking about with updating that. I would like to offer, if my co-chair agrees, to put that on our subcommittee agenda. I know we owe Jill a list for our next meeting. We already have items on that. But I think we could do, Dan, if you agree, around Robin to try to glean any updates that our members might have, or we could set it out in advance of our meeting. And Perry, I was thinking of your August group of behavioral health providers. Would they be able to do the same? Because I think that could be one. I like the broadness of input because of the representation at various committees. I think the more minds make a better product. The other thing is I found that no one person really knows everything. Maybe Perry does, but nobody else really has such a broad grasp. And so we all know pieces of the elephant, and getting the input of members into that PETA continuum in advance of presenting it to SAC members, I think would be a great method to do what Perry's talking about, where we update it, freshen it, and I think it could be a great tool in gap analysis.
So what if we proceed this way? What if I work with our staff and the planning team, with Stephen and Jack and our consultants, and we put together a little work plan of how to implement this and get something emailed out to you guys within the next, let's say, week and a half, 2 weeks, and so you can look it over and see what you think. Well, we'll kind of take all these ideas that have kind of been floated and see if we can put together a good strategy for this work, because I agree it's super important that we get it right. We can't get it wrong again, or we're decades and generations away from making anything happen. Perry?
Yeah, just to follow up, and I really appreciate Mike's thought process. We recently combined a couple of different meetings. That was the Crisis Oversight Committee meeting, which obviously involved individuals that were related to crisis response and so forth. And we also had a behavioral health providers meeting that happened offset to that. Well, obviously those individuals oftentimes not only were the same folks, because they could be involved in both, but if also getting input from the behavioral health providers. And so I would be more than happy. Now we've combined that meeting, so I have a lot of different, of those individuals there, and we just sort of broadened the scope of the agenda. But it is something in terms of, I guess I have to think it through just a little bit more, but in terms of updating the sequential intercept model, in terms of sort of making a possibly using it like a table of contents that then can be gone to in terms of the description of that actual service, those sorts of ideas and so forth. So again, kind of a reference, an agreed upon reference, as opposed to something that, that I would necessarily create, of course. More than happy to be a part of that. And that might be a really good way to utilize that group. And so I just wanted to clarify what Mike was making reference to, that just in the interest of time, we combined those two meetings, and those meetings occur every other month now, and are for an extended period of time. So just to.
Thanks, Perry. Raylene?
Please forgive me if this has been asked and answered before at other meetings and I missed it. I know that we're looking at what the public wants, and we want to make this work, and I'm all for doing whatever needs to happen as well. I'm wondering if we're also looking at liabilities and what happens if it doesn't work, and if we're putting that out to the public too. if we have to remain status quo again because it doesn't pass. We don't want that to happen. So are we going to be able to answer those questions as well, or has that already been brought up?
I don't know that it's been brought up, but I think when we get to the facilities section of this, we're, you know, of the SAC process and the needs analysis process, that will come into view. The facility, the liabilities of the facility as it exists, and so on, and other things that we need to look at in regard to that. So the answer is yes, we have to address that with the SAC people in a very straightforward way, and I think that's probably the place to do it. I know Dr. Harris mentioned photos are very powerful for that portrayal. So, you know, really bad photos of, you know, and I saw some just on Channel 5 the other night, so of our jail, and then we have, you know, some good examples that we could provide as well. Jill?
I just need some clarification right quick. Were you guys talking about having a joint meeting of Perry's Crisis Stabilization Committee and the Behavioral Health Committee?
I think that actually where that came from, if I can, that Mike had brought up the fact that we, the health department, facilitates a meeting that is crisis oversight committee, having nothing to do with task force or anything of that nature, and
Okay.
health providers, as opposed to you may be thinking in terms of the crisis stabilization center or something. So it was separate from that, Jill, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. That's a helpful.
Okay, so we will go do that, put together a work plan and get that out to you in the next 10 to 14 days, and we'll proceed from there. Anything else on that topic before we move on? Okay, I think Dan has got something from behavioral health on the state legislative session. Is that correct, Dan?
I do. Okay, I'm completely unprepared here. If we're talking about fixes to well, quote unquote fixes to 1310, it is unclear to me where that process is at. I know that Roger Goodman, Representative Goodman, has updated the legislation to help for clarification, particularly with WASPIC, Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, to provide clarity on how and when how officers should respond and deputies should respond. I know that that update is being opposed by the ACLU, at least one group. So it's unclear to me where it is in that process. That has got to get fixed. That has to get fixed. We've had multiple incidents where I've seen on video where responding officers slow down in their patrol cars to an incident where a person's screaming at the top of their lungs on a city street and then drive off. I've seen that video, and I've heard reports from downtown business owners of what I would regard as very dangerous behavior, and there's no response. Things have gotten, I would say anecdotally, because I don't have like scientific data to show this, other than Prosecutor Ritchie saying that property crimes are definitely up. And so we're seeing, I think, the long tail of the pandemic, the new street drugs, the P2P meth, the carfentanil and benzo combinations. There's just a lot going on right now. And then the lack of officers and the booking restrictions are creating multiple layers of issues. And so I don't know if this body wants to do, we already did a recommendation with Under Sheriff Chadwick, Raylene, and Maya Lisa Vanya from the Public Defender's Office. We've already made that recommendation to the broader task force, and that those recommendations have been made. I don't know what we can do further to that. And if y'all have ideas, I'd love to hear them. But at this point, the laws they've gone too far, in my opinion, and elevating officers to have to do probable cause versus reasonable suspicion to me, that's the Terry stops that comes from the early 1960s piece of, well, it's actually 1968 when it went before the Supreme Court, but that's really changed things. And there's a impunity that I've seen. I've been out with Lieutenant Murphy and Lieutenant Johnson from Bellingham PD 2 Fridays ago, and I saw people flagrantly flaunting their behaviors, and it was to the point where it just seems like we are living in a lawless community, and I just think there's an urgent public safety component to it that has to be addressed at the state level. So that's where I'm at right now.
Raylene?
I agree with Dan. I recently was informed of a case that they didn't file charges on because they figured that they were never going to be able to book the person, and he was probably going to be found incompetent anyways. So I guess we're just waiting for a more severe crime that they know they'll be able to hold that individual on. He did repeat offense, so now I'm looking at those charges are going to be filed, but it's just echoing what Dan's saying. There's a lot of issues, and I understand the problems that we're facing with our current facilities, but the officers are frustrated and not sure if they want to open themselves up to liabilities either, knowing that there's little they can do with certain individuals.
Stephen?
Thanks, Barry. I don't want to. My point is different than 1310. So if we have more we want to discuss about that, I'm glad to wait. But I just wanted to put in a reminder. Since we're talking about the legislative session, I was hoping you would report on your recent work with Representative Rule and Executive Sadhu and the DOC.
Yeah, I can give what I know, because what happened was I got a call from Representative Rule last Monday around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, saying that there was some money available for behavioral health through ARPA. It was passed through from the state, the state portion of ARPA, and we should be putting together some sort of a capital proposal related to behavioral health. So I worked with a number of people. I talked with Arlene. I talked with Harriet. You had recommended her. I talked to her. I talked to EMS, and we came up with a kind of an idea about the urgent care center was probably one of the things that was high on our list from the task force. I mean, there's a recommendation in our December annual report we put out at the end of 2021. So I submitted just a quick and dirty proposal to Executive Sadhu. We had to have an answer back by Friday of last week, so it was a very short turnaround to get that capital request in. I'm not sure exactly what went into the back into the system, and I see Deputy Executive Schroeder is here. I know we decided I think there's some study money that was requested. Maybe Tyler, you could give us an idea of what the how that process ended playing out.
Yeah, Tyler Schroeder, sorry about that. As soon as I unmuted, my phone rang, of course, which is why I was on mute for most of the meeting. Submittal to get to Representative Rule and Representative Shoemake for about $2.2 million. And that would be to kind of build off of this urgent care discussion or look at a alternative response kind of base station. That includes some capital money to maybe consider a remodel at the older crisis center there at the alternative work center, the square section out at Division Street, to be able to equip that for a location where the Grace and Lead teams would be able to be, and some designated crisis responders, as well as looking into some additional operating dollars to expand those services. So the capital ask that was submitted was for $2.2 million. And that is for both kind of capital and operational to expand some of those services.
Thanks, Tyler. You
So
know,
you didn't include any urgent care plans.
I don't believe so, but Barry helped me. I think we had those conversations about the urgent care. And I don't think they were fully developed to be able to submit a capital ask associated with it.
I think, Arlene, part of this, what Executive Sadhu and I had talked about, that there's some of this money is going to go towards looking at some of our needs, and it kind of dovetails well into what we're doing through the SAC process. I think it shows that there's a commitment from the state and the county to really look into finding all the resources we can to advance our behavioral health causes here in Whatcom County. So I think working towards that, Arlene, is what I'm hopeful for. Is what we're doing, is working towards that idea of having a centralized intake center where they can be triaged, whether it be to a crisis care center or over to the crisis stabilization center, or whether it's outpatient referrals, whatever the triage kind of decision is made. But I think this demonstrates that the county is very serious about this, and we're moving ahead, at the fastest pace we can. So that's kind of the way I take it.
It's disappointing.
Yeah, I'd like to have seen it gone further. I had envisioned 15 to 20 million. And
the thing is that the thing that law enforcement and emergency services don't have is that place for people to come and be treated immediately. That's that piece is really missing. So even if you do what you're describing, which is of course needed too, you're still going to be lacking the place for people to be triaged. So this is
so
yeah.
Tyler, do you know that any more details around what the work center space would be used for?
First I'd like to kind of follow up with Arlene's disappointment. I think it shows that as the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force, and as well as the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, continues to put together what a program would look like and what a facility would look like for that need, that can be incorporated into those discussions. And that could be the first priority to really move forward associated with it. I think it shows some commitment to it. It also shows that that could be an integrated part into a new facility, whether it be at the same location or it be at a separate location associated with it. But you can't go to Olympia and ask for $15 million without a firm understanding of what the facility would do, how it would handle, and what the capital nature of it. So I really think with the task force indicating that to be one of the priorities at the end of this last year in the December, we can really continue to mold that, create what that vision is, and be ready to get some capital money for it, hopefully in the next session. So I think it is a step into that direction. As it relates,
and I think it's right on the money as far as our trajectory, as in the intent of what we're trying to do. I think it's going to work fine. Mike?
Thanks for calling on me, Barry. So this is about advocacy. This is a little bit like Stephen. It's a little bit aligned with this current discussion, but it's a little bit aside from it as well. One of the things, whether that's additional alternative response, whether it's an urgent care center, people need to go after that intervention. And Stephen and I have been part of a little group just trying to target some housing resources to those that are in the criminal justice system. And once people get out, we want places for them to go. And this is more of a value that to start aligning and thinking about, when we're thinking about an intervention for behavioral health, that we also think about where the person goes after. So it's a little continuum thinking, but I agree with Arlene that an urgent care center would be extremely valuable, both for our first responders, but also for the people who have behavioral health crises. What would make that even better is if we could create pathways, and I'm talking bricks and mortar, build housing for people that have been in our criminal justice system. Because one of the things that data tells us around the country is that when we house people, they're less likely to offend. This is just true. We've done this in Whatcom County and it bore out. It is also true. People's offenses were cut by more than half after being housed. Some will eventually get jobs and move on. It's a huge difference. And I think the reason why I bring it up when we think about advocacy is the more that we can align our thinking that we have this intervention at the time of crisis, which is so critical, yes, but we should be able to discharge that person to a new house, to a new apartment. And so to whatever extent we can, in our thinking, in our proposal creation, think about the divert to where. You're out of this system, where do you go to? It's going to be absolutely critical. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time argument, I know, but I just want to say how critical it is. And I think especially there's a little bit of excitement because there are some leftover COVID dollars or some leftover ARPA dollars. And I think investments into housing for folks that are poor and criminal justice involved is going to be one of the biggest things we can do to help us out of this situation of constantly having to arrest people on the streets. So I just want to make that plug, and it's really more of a strategic thinking that as we go into proposal creation, as we go, if we maybe get an earmark and get some dollars here in the community, that we consider the unhoused nature of many of those individuals and work the best we can to address that. Thank you.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
Hey, real quick, I need to hop off. I just need to let you guys know I need to hop off for another meeting. Good discussion. I'll catch up with you guys later, and I'll circle back with Barry or Mike to get details.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, see
Take
you.
care.
I mean, I completely agree with what you just said. It's sort of like, the legs of a stool. You need all the legs in place. And that's a lot of what I've been trying to talk about for a very long time, which is filling the gaps in the system, all of which are absolutely vital, which makes it a huge investment, of course. My own experience is very intimately with that property on Division Street because I worked there for 9 years. And I know everything about that building, which is an insufficient building. I can tell you that. And it's a great property. It's a great space. But to make anything really lasting and valuable out of what do you call those? Pole building? Is it a pole building? I think it is. It was a terrible building to work in.
Tyler, did you have I saw your hand go up as soon as when they were talking housing. Did you have a response?
No, I was just going to add more detail to the modified proposal that was.
Oh,
that was
go
submitted.
ahead. Please go.
Well, it was just to recognize that, the urgent care seems like a comprehensive location for alternative drop-off points for law enforcement and emergency medical teams. And without having property identified or a structure in nature to accomplish that larger proposal, this was kind of a modified request to utilize some existing space that the county has out at that location for a very similar nature. So looking at that area, and I don't disagree with you, Arlene, the facility itself is not the best for a long-term facility. But there could be a way to add some additional bed capacity at it and to be that alternative drop location for law enforcement in emergency medical, which we don't have at the Crisis Stabilization Center. I know that was a anticipated goal, but we all know the circumstances surrounding that. And so these beds could be for a shorter term, direct location for drop off, and then you would have a coordinated service and entry into the rest of it. So I would tend to agree, Arlene. I too am kind of disappointed that we weren't ready to ask for the whole kit and caboodle. But it does kind of get us moving forward in that direction and is a step into that process. And just before I kind of leave the topic, you know, the county, I know you guys all know, but we have purchased the property next door to the Crisis Stabilization Center and to the Alternative Work Center. And really, if we start to look at that as a campus, maybe there is some opportunity to provide a campus type of facility that accomplishes both the behavioral health side of it and some of the correctional side of it moving forward. So that really could be some of the visioning process that happens in the next year or so.
Stephen?
I just want to say that Jack and I early on consulted with Barry when he was contacted, and we both endorsed what Barry presented as $15 to $20 million for the urgent care center. And that was primarily because that was one of the handful of top priorities we had communicated as a task force to the county council. So it seemed aligned with what we'd already asked for. And our understanding was that dozens and dozens of millions of dollars were available to be distributed. So now that I hear Tyler, I understand why this got diverted to what it actually is. And I'm a little less disappointed, but the disappointment that I still carry is, and this touches on Mike's advocacy for an advocacy agenda, is my disappointment is in the legislators that we had 4 days to come up with a proposal that would be justifiable for capital expenditures, which is insane. And so somehow the legislators didn't consult us or groups like us, which exist in other jurisdictions across the state, when they did 1310, and now we're in that morass. They didn't consult with us about capital expenditures like this. Somehow between sessions, I guess, I would really encourage us to try to have a heart-to-heart talk with our legislators in a bigger advocacy picture about how all these pieces need to fit together, and how we can't just drop architect plans on them in 4 days for a new facility. Something's not right with this process, and I don't see how it's going to change unless we try to articulate a better way for them to think about this stuff.
I agree, Stephen. I still have kind of whiplash from last week, so couldn't agree more.
Can't blame you.
Yeah, Raylene?
Thank you. I am in agreement again with Arlene, and I'm really disappointed because I really want an urgent care facility, but I think it's twofold. And the reason I say that is just a recent incident that we had in court yesterday. Was a defendant that had been arrested for a DUI, and it was a drug-induced DUI. He came in and he pled guilty. He was using Xanax. He went to the border. He has autism. He tells everybody this in open court. And he gets to the border and they're not going to give him entry, and he gets all frustrated and he takes more than the prescribed amount of the Xanax. And then he realizes he's having an anxiety attack. And so he calls 911 and he goes to the hospital. And because it didn't meet the requirements and they determined he wasn't a danger to himself or others, he was released from the hospital, and he got back to Blaine and he picked up his vehicle and he drove, and then he hit a tree and he was arrested for the DUI. And the drug recognition expert came out and he got booked, and then he was released. And then shortly after that, he was arrested on felony harassment. And then 2 weeks later, we're seeing him in court again, and he's explaining this to him. And so something that Dan Hamill brought up before was changing the language of the ITA, because law enforcement do get frustrated. They bring them to the hospitals and they're not holding them long enough to get somebody stabilized. And part of that is because of the laws that are set on how long they can hold somebody and how long they can't, as well as not having enough space or that urgent care facility that's needed. But I think if we can change some of the language on there, the ITA, and then also express the need for that urgent care facility, I think you have to do both in order to succeed. I think there's a lot more involved, and this is just a simple story and a snippet of something that I've seen personally.
You know, I've thought of this urgent care thing as probably 6 months ago as a 2-stage rocket. You know, I'd hoped the first stage was going to be a little bigger when we found out about this capital money, but that's, you know, we're still on that, like I said before, we're still on that same trajectory of seriously looking at urgent care facility. And so I feel this fits into that mold of what I thought might be some temporary help would be the kind of the first stage rocket. And then later on, once we have a better definition of what we want to do through both the SAC process and our facility engagement and our health department engagement, that we can define it better and then really have a meaningful project to put forward. So I'm hopeful that we can still stay on track with getting something accomplished. Mike?
One thing that occurred to me in this conversation, talking about advocacy, but also these really urgent needs. And Barry, the first thing you brought up to this group was, you know, talking about planning first, the SAC work, right? And planning for a new correctional facility. And I wonder, just strategy wise, is there any benefit? Obviously, if we had plans more baked, had a design charrette, maybe we could have popped in 4 days, but we don't, and we didn't. And I certainly understand that. And I'm glad and really thankful. And I know Deputy Schroeder had to leave. I want to pass along thanks for getting what he did, because honestly, when you don't move fast, you get zero, and that would be a worse place. So I just want to just call that out and be and express my gratitude. But my thinking is, one of the things that people seem to be really up in arms when we went for new correctional facilities is that we're not dealing with a behavioral health situation. And I'm just wondering if strategically what this group thinks about working kind of on the side, doesn't have to be the same group, but should we be then, Barry, maybe developing or creating the nucleus of a group that might create some plans around an urgent care, do some parallel needs analysis? Are there some data that we're grabbing with Dr. Harris and the work about correctional facility that we can look at the other place where we'll take people that when we shouldn't be taking them to our new jail? And so I just want to bring that up to the group and see, and Barry, especially from your standpoint politically, would that make sense to have a parallel process working to create that and working to be more shovel ready for an urgent care facility alongside?
It's interesting that you asked that. I wasn't going to bring it up today, but I will now. I was thinking that, you know, we have placed our crisis stabilization facility subcommittee on kind of a relaxed schedule. They're meeting quarterly now. Maybe that's work that group should be, since they've had experience once working through that kind of work with the crisis stabilization facility. If that's something that they should have on their work plan as well. Perry, what do you think?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I was actually involved in the team that, sort of the reach out saying, boy, Representative Rule is, hoping for this information, and not a lot of definition, as you're aware, in terms of, okay, what's sort of happening, and trying to come up with something in that very short period of time that would add to the resources that we currently have, and create, at least, a component. Snohomish County has a diversion center that is probably a program that any individual can go to. They're typically supported at that point in time by it happens to be a master's level individual, but a caseworker that works with them specifically in terms of a release plan, a return to the community plan, and a discharge plan. And so that was, concerning, just as others had said, the short time frame. However, I think that I would love to be involved in further discussion about what specifically is needed. And as Mike was saying, and Arlene, other models that, that currently exist, and being able to, have that as an advantage in doing some of that, research, not dissimilar to what we've been doing with, the alternative response, components as well. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in programs that are on the ground and functioning, and what's it like. I mean, literally talking with the staff is an amazing input and information. So I think that it's a good thought process as a component of the Crisis Stabilization Center, bringing additional information in and taking a look at, well, then what would that look like, and at least initiating the discussions. It makes a lot of sense.
Caleb?
All right, sorry. So Barry, you mentioned some things that you weren't going to mention, and I'm going to mention some things that I wasn't going to mention. So I apologize in advance here. So when Mike talked earlier about, sort of those supportive services that we need to keep our eyes focused on, a couple of things come to mind in addition to housing for me, and that's employment, and that's food. And I think that, as I work through the community, and I work with the community, and I engage with the community, we run into anecdotal evidence of people who have struggles. They may have a job, they may have a house, but they can't afford to eat. We ran into an individual who was working, but didn't have food, or hadn't had eaten in 24 hours. So they might have employment, but they haven't got their basic needs met in other areas and other ways. And so what I would like to be volunteering again is, if there are ways that this discussion talks about further services, supportive services, I have some ideas that I think could incorporate the food and the employment aspect of those services. And then the other one that I know we talk about, right? And everybody in this setting has a pretty firm grasp on this, but we've got opiate use disorder services that I think that we could incorporate into that as well. And not just the medication, because the medication is one component, but I think that there's a lack of overall warm handoffs to community. There's a lack of supportive counseling services that really we find in other areas help to reduce those recidivism rates. And so again, I just want to be involved if that's a possibility, if there's going to be discussion about those kinds of things, because I think that that's what we're on and about here in our community. And I really want to make sure that if the question comes up again, we go, oh, here's my list. Here's the stuff that we need. We're ready with an answer. If to the degree that that's a possibility, if there's, money going a begging. So again, sorry, I wasn't going to say anything, but there's too many things coming through my mind.
That's great, Caleb. I think that, the more we think together, the better our outcomes are going to be. So that's what I appreciate about this group so much. Arlene?
Yeah, I think Perry is so right that we need to look at the models that already exist. So we have Everett nearby, and the Bay Area has programs. California has several programs, and they exist all the way across the country. So they have been functioning for a number of years. So that means there's good research about what works and what doesn't work, and what might possibly fit into this community, which is smaller than a lot of those communities. And the other thing that I think is really interesting in the conversation we're having is the fact that this is a great giant web of connections, and every piece of the web matters. If they're broken in any part, the whole system doesn't work very well. Somebody falls through. So the fact that we're realizing that is wonderful, I think, and necessary. So when we're talking about the programs, they're not in competition with each other. They all matter, and they are all a piece. So that, to me, is very encouraging that we're seeing that.
All right, I think we'll leave that there. Good discussion, everyone. Our next item is rules of procedures for committees. And Stephen, I guess you're going to lead us on this one.
I'm sorry, Barry, I don't know what this is, or why I'm assigned to it. Jill, I think,
Okay.
Stephen, you asked me to put this on the agenda to discuss the possibility of term limits for committee co-chairs.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
Okay, we can skip it.
I think in the interest of time, maybe we should, and maybe Barry and I can sort of resurrect whatever little blip in my neural activity caused that.
I think I saw an email go by, but it went by kind of fast, and when just everything else that was going on at the time. So
I apologize.
I'll engage with you, and we'll talk about it.
Okay. Thank you, Jill.
Okay, IPR Task Force Communications. Is that you, Jill?
Yes. If you have your packet handy, inside the packet on pages 15 and 16 are an edited list of all potential communication campaign topics that were suggested by the committees. If you recall, we're asking our consultant to develop communications campaigns for 3 or 4 topics. And this list is my attempt to distill some of the committee's recommendations for topics into something a little more cohesive than what came out of committees. I can screen share this if you like. If you don't have your packet handy, just let me know. So what I'm looking for from the steering committee today is guidance on moving forward with selecting what topics we will assign to the communications consultant.
Okay, so we know there's one given one that we've already talked about, and that is the support and the creation of a public engagement plan for the needs assessment process. So we've identified that one.
That's a separate issue. That's a separate phase. I'm talking about the work that's specific to the task force.
Okay, well, yeah,
So
no,
all
I know,
the
yeah, I know that. I was just kind of putting that in the conversation for context because it's probably the same consultant that's doing it. So this is all interrelated work. So I just wanted to reiterate that is one thing that this effort will be doing. That's all, Jill. I realize it's separate. So this is quite a list.
Where's the list?
On pages 15 and 16 of your packet.
Jill, just off the top, I want to make sure that the jail proposal goes through as well as communicating stuff that we've done. And so I agree with Barry that it is kind of a combination thing. But going back to legal and justice, I think the LEAD program and home detention, which I see on the top of the list, are 2 very valuable things that we can share. And I think that's important that we are not trying to incarcerate everybody, and we're using other options. And then the LEAD program, I think, is beneficial to make sure that we're communicating that out to the public. So I like those right off the top. I hope that helps, and I'll let everybody else go.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think I've said this before. We should be communicating some of what we've accomplished, some of what we've learned, and some of the walls we butted into that we see are bigger issues than we thought they were. So I think, like Raylene said, LEAD program is one, the Crisis Stabilization Center is another. The fact that when we looked at how well drug court was working, we realized we were missing a piece of clean and sober housing. And so the recovery house got developed out of that. That's a learning piece and bricks and mortar piece. And then I think we ought to be focusing on identifying the fact that we have run into a huge systemic problem with our lack of data. If we're supposed to be making good policy, we need good and comprehensive data, which we don't have. And similarly, if we're going to be diverting from jail into treatment services and the kinds of related supports that Caleb so wisely listed, where we have workforce issues. We have program lack of capacity, and we have workforce problems that are going to take a while to solve. So I think the public deserves to know that this isn't going to be a quick fix as well. And those are more thematic. They don't go directly to your bullets, Jill, but I think we can fit some of those pieces together that way.
So, Jill, what's your hope to get out of this discussion? I see you have 3 to 4 topics out of this massive list, right?
Sure. My hope was to choose 3 or 4 topics from this list, but it occurred to me, I'm wondering if instead of having the steering committee choose something before a consultant is chosen, I'm wondering if we just give this list as it is to the consultant and discuss with that person or team what it should be. So I think I'm getting the impression that I need to just stop here in terms of picking these campaign initiatives, and then let that be one of the topics of our first meeting with the consultant when he or she or they come on board. What do you think about that?
I like that idea because I think we don't know what their capacities are going to be, and so on and so on. Lots of questions. So
exactly, and they'll know how to distill all these bigger ideas that you guys want conveyed down into bite-sized messages for the community. So,
yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Okay, Mike?
I was going to echo what Stephen said. I think you did actually hit some of the initiatives, and Jill, you probably didn't do it intentionally, but your first couple on there, I think you're hitting some big spots. So just in terms of values of what's spoken, I think Stephen hit them. The other piece that I would add, and Jill, I really agree that this coming out with the consultant might make more sense. One of the things that I would hope that can be done in communication, this may be more subtle, but is we want to generate some interest, involvement, and community awareness of the fact of our current situation with our jail and where we need to go as a community and how people can get involved. So I think we should expect that educational campaigns talking about successes. I really like Stephen talking about some of the brick walls. And I really think strategically bringing the public in so they can be a part of a solution where we have a safer community, we have a better facility that's better for everybody, for the people working in law enforcement, for the people experiencing correctional services, and for when they get out. And so to whatever extent, and that is more meta, right? That is more kind of in between the initiatives, but I think to whatever extent possible, it would achieve other goals that this committee has brought about, which is 1, more inclusion, diversity of voices, and 2, getting people just in general involved in knowing what's going on with criminal justice in Whatcom County. How can they get involved? What are some areas that we could use that involvement? So I hope that when we educate, we also prime the pump for people to get involved.
Perry?
Stephen said a thought process about accomplishments, the way that I heard it, accomplishments, learning, and challenges for the task force is a great frame up as far as I'm concerned for so many of these. I mean, we could obviously go through as a group or whatever and say, that goes here, or, you know, it triggers something. And I like that sort of reporting out and information, because so many important things, and of course they're all interconnected to each other. And so I think that it's a great format to be able to consider in maybe we were talking about handing it to this, you know, this individual. But I think maybe frame it up in that manner to hand it off. And I know it's super minor, Jill, but I may not be able to tag up with you under the new program since formation. If we could, it's really a co-responder instead of mental health deputy program. And it's behavioral health is part of why. And so really the terminology is co-responder and could be behavioral health deputy program. I just didn't want it to go someplace and say, wait, don't you work with substance use disorder and, you know, the other components of behavioral health. So sorry about that detail, but.
Anything else? Jill, do you feel like you have what you need? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Items for next task force agenda. We'll have obviously a SAC update. I'll provide that. What else do we have?
I just want to get ask the task force members as a whole if to confirm their 2022 committee signups. That should only take a few minutes. I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to have an update to the task force about transitioning the Grace and Lead programs into a new division of the health department.
Seems logical. Yeah. Mike?
Thanks, Barry. Sorry, I'm talking so much. I had Jill send you all the GARE membership newsletter. I know I would be really interested as kind of a champion of that to work with who in the county is kind of leading this. And Barry, one of the things that I remember is obviously the creation of a racial equity task force, but that doesn't squarely live on the shoulders of just a task force of volunteers. I think it really falls upon all of us, but as the county joined, you know, what is the county's implementation plan? What does that look like? How could we be helpful? And the other piece is, how can we start using resources? So even if we haven't developed, for example, many communities will create within each department, so say that's facilities and say that's corrections or whatever aspect, they create a representative. And then they gather those representatives, right, to continue the work of racial equity work in all the departments. So I don't know if that's going to be a blueprint we follow, but certainly want to take advantage, A, of our membership. B, I sent that out because there are some really interesting pieces out there. And the data piece that ESRI, and I don't know what that stands for, but GIS mapping, has created a tool in conjunction with GARE and some other member jurisdictions to create data analysis tools. So I just, in seeing the newsletter, it just reminded me like, wow, we're members now. How can we take advantage? So I would, one, put that on our agenda, but two, maybe a request if we can from whoever's taking the lead on this in the county. Maybe we can ask Deputy Executive Schroeder what the plans are of the executive's office. And so one, what's going on? And two, how can we be helpful or supportive? And three, is it possible for us as committee members, county appointed, for those of us that are county appointed members, to take advantage of any of the GARE membership learnings that are available? So obviously there's a membership portal, which would allow us to get into some of these tools. And even if there's not a complete full-blown implementation plan, I'm fine with that. I know things happen incrementally, but it feels crazy to not take advantage of that investment. And I'm just wondering, and Jill, maybe a request, can we figure out, can we get in? Can members of committees get in? Can we use some of those tools? So one, I told you guys I'd bring it up every meeting, so hopefully without fail, I'm doing that. Hopefully I'm doing it in a way that elicits more interest. I mean, I'm not turning people off, but I really want to hold us to that fire because we made that commitment. And I think now we've got some resources in front of us. And I'd personally like to play with some of those toys.
Jill, you got any thoughts on how we might engage in that discussion, or who we might engage with to present that?
I know that the county has a GARE group. I don't know off the top of my head who that is, but I will find out and invite them to attend. I sent around an email to the IPRTF members who are county employees. I don't know if non-county employees can access it through the county membership. So that would be a good question to ask. But I sent around an email and I can forward it to you guys so you can see it. That kind of has a little how to begin using GARE instruction, orientation kind of a thing. So I think we can definitely set that up for a discussion at the next meeting.
Thank you. Stephen?
First of all, I want to thank Mike for his indefatigable advocacy on this and really endorse everything he said. I thought it was very strange that Mike was the only one getting the newsletter and had to take the responsibility of distributing it to several of the rest of us. So thank you for doing that, Mike. But, you know, the county is a member of GARE mostly because of agitation from the task force to consider that. So I don't really, I'm going to get on my horse about this. I don't really feel that we should be going hand in hand to whatever this county planning group is begging to be privy to some of this information. I think we ought to be an active part of that, and I think they ought to recognize that because of the through and through relevance it has to our work. So I hope, Barry, maybe you can champion that in the halls of power. But I'd like more of us to get that direct information. I'd like quickly for us to have access to those resources. My interest hit on the GIS stuff that Mike mentioned as well. I'd like to get that in front of Dr. Harris for the SAC work as well. So all of that is endorsement for a couple steps ahead. And I'd like to do that sooner rather than later because we've been touting ourselves as being members for a long time and we haven't done a lot with it, and it's time. As for the task force agenda, the other thing I think is we had a long and detailed discussion about several things happening in the legislative session. It'll be a couple more weeks down the road. I wonder if it might be appropriate to invite Representative Rule to update us on what's going on in the legislative session, both on those reforms of last session's legislation and on some of the ARPA capital monies and anything else that's relevant to our work. Because I think the task force as a whole should be aware of some of those developments. So I think that would, even if she can't come, there ought to be some way to get information from her or others that can update the task force on legislative developments.
Okay, yeah. Anything else on the upcoming task force meeting? Okay, we are at public comment. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak?
We don't have any attendees at this time.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? We've had quite a brainstorming session here today, and I really appreciate you all so much and all your depth and breadth of thinking. So, anything else? Could I get Kathy and Jill to stay behind just for a second? And Caleb, I have an eye appointment coming up, so I won't be able to make index. Okay. All right, folks, we are adjourned.